Hey folks, this is Kalani with all of the new storylines over in Darkshore about Tyrande getting her new makeup kit and Sylvanas creating a few new playmates. It's not too surprising that everything escalates into a new warfront. That's right, if you haven't heard yet, patch 8.1 will be bringing us another warfront to play through, and this time the Alliance and Horde will be fighting over Darkshore. I think the setup for this warfront is significantly better than Arathi Highlands, because that was sort of a case of, here's a warfront, go have fun. Why are we fighting over the Arathi Highlands again? Well, because faction conflict, and it's a bottleneck for the Eastern Kingdoms, and it's really shiny, honestly. So, alright, I guess we'll fight over the Arathi Highlands then. With Darkshore, there's actually a story leading up to it. The Horde have gotten a little cozy after torching Teldrassil. They've set up a little base camp in Lordanel, and have even got a little offshore oil rig going. They've been busy for sure, but losing Teldrassil isn't something that Tyrande is going to accept without a little bit of retribution. Finally, some response to the Horde atrocities going on. Elune also seems to be in on the whole gig because Darkshore is in a state of constant eclipse, which looks really cool as far as skyboxes go. So the Horde is sticking around because it's now their turf, but there's a little bit more to it. Sylvanas has sent Nathanos and a couple of her Valkyr to start raising Night Elves from the dead. That's a lot of extra corpses just lying around ready to be added to her Grand Scourge army. Did I say Scourge? Because I meant Scourge. So both the Forsaken and the Night Elves have business in Darkshore, which means we get to fight over another zone in the old world. The Alliance version of this warfront was just made available for testing, so let's have a look how things are shaping up so far. The start of this warfront is significantly different when compared to the Arathi Highlands warfront. Instead of hopping off an airship, killing a commander and gaining a base, there's a little bit more to it. As the Alliance, you arrive by boat. I'm glad we won't just be paratrooping down into every warfront, that's a nice touch, and after reaching the shore you need to break through the Horde's line of defense, take out a few sharpshooters, dismantle a few blight throwers, and take back the ruins of Orbadine to continue. Then you head a little north to rescue and recruit some ancient to help you in your battle, and you push on to establish your base in Bashalaran. With this being a Night Elf vs Forsaken themed warfront, it should come as no surprise that those ancients you rescued turn into half of your buildings in your little encampment. We're full on Warcraft 3 mode here. I'm so happy that we're not attacking and defending two huge forts again. This warfront is all about the little camps. Let's have a look at the warfront map before we go any further, because this warfront is going to be a little bit smaller than Arathi. We have the base at Bashalaran. You can collect some iron from the Lornester mine below and to the right. We also have a little lumber camp on the right called Cinderfall Grove, as well as Forlorn Crossing in the middle and Gloomtide Strand to the left. Forlorn doesn't really do much if you capture it, it just opens up the map a little bit more. If you capture Gloomtide Strand though, you can recruit an Archdruid to help in your fight. After capturing all of that, you want to head up the middle to Ashwood Depot, which is positively crawling with mobs. Take control of that and you can start to recruit chimeras to ride on, which are pretty cool. They have 2 breath attacks, which you can rotate, and they also have a group-wide haste buff. The only point left after that is Lordanel Landing. Take the beach from the Horde, you can start sieging their ships in the water. Obviously, we couldn't have a warfront without some required siege weaponry, so this time you'll be playing with glaive throwers. After the boats are destroyed, you move on to the Horde oil rig and dispatch their commander. I'm assuming that, for the most part, the Horde side of this warfront will be the opposite, taking over Lordanel to begin with and working your way south to siege the little base the Night Elves built. Even though the map itself seems quite a bit smaller, I feel like the warfront itself didn't really go by that much quicker. It still took around 40 minutes for my first playthrough, start to finish. I think the little scenario story sections at the start took quite a while, so we weren't really building a base until 7 or 8 minutes in. It also feels like there are way more monsters just planted around, shredders chopping down trees, goblins lobbing explosives everywhere, which I actually really like. These aren't monsters that respawn very quickly, if at all, once you've pushed your way a little into the map. So it kind of feels like the Horde are definitely in control here when you start, and if you go out on your own and go too far, you'll probably end up in quite a pickle. So stay as a group, clear your way through the enemy forces, and capture all of those camps. As for the buildings you'll be working towards, the main Night Elf building is the Tree of Life. You will eventually upgrade that into the Tree of Ages, and finally into the Tree of Eternity. Again, for anyone who played Warcraft 3, some of these names might be a little familiar. To help you recruit troops, you can build up the Ancient of War. after which you can fork over a few lumber to have a sentinel, archer, druid or huntress follow you around. There's a few options here: sentinels are melee DPS, archers are ranged DPS, druids are healers, and huntresses are tanks. So if you're rocking a DPS spec and you want to go solo for a little bit of the Warfront, pick up a huntress and a druid and you should be golden. There's a special building called the Altar of Elders. This is where you can get your stacks of bristling power for a quick damage boost. This building works like the Altar of Storms or Kings from Arathi in that you can collect a special essence of the Warfront and you can turn it into magic yourself into something really cool. For the Alliance, you can be a Keeper of the Grove who has a lot of self-heals and defensive abilities, a Fairy Dragon who is more of a healer and support unit, or a Dryad who is full-on range DPS. I wonder what you get on the Horde side. Abominations, Plague Spreaders, or maybe an Apothecary or two? That's going to be exciting to find out. I also like that you get to choose what to do with the essence rather than just turning it in and turning into a mini beacon of power. We also have the Hunter's Hall where you can progress all of your weapon and armor upgrades, and then the Glaive Works because we have to have some siege weaponry in here. The Glaive Works will allow you to start building the Glaive Throwers, which you will need to finish the Warfront. Obviously, the Horde will have Forsaken themed buildings instead of the Night Elf trees. I'm really curious if they will borrow from the undead race of Warcraft 3 as much as they did for the Night Elf race. I'm not sure a lot of that stuff would really translate over as well as the Ancients and all that jazz though. So how does the Warfront play out? Well, as with the Arathi Highlands Warfront, you're going to be limited by how many resources you collect, mainly because you can't finish the Warfront without a few Glaive Throwers, and they're the last thing on your production list. Iron and wood are still the two main resources again, so no changes there. You can collect iron from the mine on the map, either by picking it up from your war chest, killing the monsters in the mine, or looting the crates which spawn outside of the mine. You can get a pretty good chunk of iron if you pop back there every 5 minutes or so. What I found really cool about the Darkshore Warfront though is that as you push through the enemy forces, you're actually going to be collecting a lot of iron. Well, as long as you actually loot the stuff you're killing, that is. The Plague Throwers, Plague Wagons, and Goblin Shredders are all made of a pretty good amount of metal, so it makes sense that you can loot that metal from the siege engines you destroy. By the time you start building up your base, everyone should actually have a handful of iron each, which is a really good way to kickstart your progress. If you're ever feeling a little light on iron, you can head out into the trees to hunt down some shredders. Killing the enemy faction is actually worth a little bit here. As for wood, you're going to be a little more limited, which can be a bit frustrating because wood seems to be the main resource for the Night Elves here, which makes a lot of sense. Gotta have a lot of wood to build up a big tree after all. You can capture the lumber camp to get your wisps collecting wood for you, and you can also find lots of piles of wood hanging around near the shredders. It looks like the Horde is trying to chop down all of the trees here, so be a good elf and pick up some of that wood. We can repurpose it after you destroy the shredders. Obviously you want to check your war chest every now and then to pick up all of the materials that passively generate there, just to make sure you're on track for those Glaive Throwers. When you get down to the basic gameplay, Darkshore is very similar to the Arathi Highlands. You gather up resources, build up your base, maybe hire a few troops, and get your Glaive Throwers operational. After that you push down the only lane available, wait for the siege stuff to do its work, and then push on for the final boss. I think the little story intro definitely makes a huge difference, and I like the fact that several changes have been made. It's not just a copy-paste project plopped into a different map. You have different essences to collect, which allow you to turn into those fancy creatures I mentioned earlier, and gathering resources is a little bit different. The first few times you play through this Warfront, assuming you do the story quests beforehand, are probably going to be a little more interesting when compared to the Arathi Highlands. I think it's great that we have an actual reason to be here, and this Warfront is part of the progressing story arc of Battle for Azeroth. It honestly makes me question why Arathi Highlands was released as the first Warfront. If we didn't have Arathi until now, and if Warfronts hadn't been hyped up to be a massive feature, this Darkshore Warfront would have been a really great surprise just waiting for us after the new chunk of story. I think this Warfront is how Warfronts should be in general, and I hope people will still give it a shot even though they're bored of Arathi probably. I also think it was a mistake to have just the Warfront without explaining the downtime involved, but thankfully, now that 8.1 will introduce the Darkshore Warfront, we should have two opposite cycles, so you should have something to do relating to each Warfront every week. So for 1 week you might have control of Darkshore with the outdoor zone, rares, world bosses, whatever they decide to add in there, while having the contribution phrase to Arathi Highlands. And everything should cycle together, so no matter what faction you're playing on, there should be something at least semi-interesting to do every week relating to Warfronts. I think the Darkshore Warfront is definitely a step above the Arathi Warfront, but I do worry about the overall longevity of any Warfronts in the future. I feel like that might just be a part of the system that Blizzard has created, but oh well. I'm looking forward to giving this Warfront another poke from the Horde side of things, but that's it for this preview of the new Warfront coming in patch 8.1. What do you think of the Warfront from what you've seen so far? Would you like to see more Warfronts added to the game? Or would you rather that development time be spent elsewhere? Leave all your thoughts in the comments section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon. You can see their names floating by on screen. If you want to join these lovely guys and gals, you can find a link in the description below. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.